Hey, it's Freddie Cruz reaching back into the archives once again to a conversation I had with a friend of mine. Her name is Anna J. Walner, a local artist. We flash back to the early 20th century in Galveston with her latest novel, Saltwater and Driftwood. As you may or may not know, the Great Storm of 1900 remains the deadliest natural disaster in our nation's history, killing between 6,000 and 8,000 people on Galveston Island. And Anna's novel flawlessly blends devastating facts from that historical event with fiction. During this episode, we talk about her writing process and how life in a hurricane zone like Houston influenced her work. Get your copy now of Saltwater and Driftwood at annajwalner.com.
Hi, I'm Ed Sheeran. This is Bruno Mars.
Hey, it's Katy Perry.
This is your man Flo Rida with Freddie Cruz.
This is AJ Mitchell with Freddie Cruz.
Freddie Cruz.
Freddie Cruz.
Tell your Chico pick Mr. 305 and you already know what it is.
My name is Freddie, and it's time to cruise through HTX.
I remember starting this book back in, it had to have been the fall of last year. And if that doesn't give you guys an idea of the kind of work that goes into writing a historical novel, I don't know how to explain it, because there's just so much research that has to be done about that time period and the way that Galveston, we've all here in the Houston area, and you included, you go down to Galveston all the time, and you don't think about the way that it used to be, but I had to sit down with the Historical Society, the Galveston Historical Society, and ask them for maps of what roads were paved, what were gravel, what were shell or shale, and all of this extraneous information that you would say, you're never going to find that useful. But somehow it ended up playing a role in the book in some way, shape, form, fashion. Even the most minute of details ended up being part of what brings that Gilded Age, the 1900s, the early it is 1900, to life. So it needed to be as realistic as possible, down to the paving of the roads.
What is incredible to me is that there is even any kind of historical record from that era, because your story, and I do want to, after I ask you this, I'd love to get the elevator pitch. So I guess we're kind of going a little bit backward, but the storm of the Great Storm, before they were naming hurricanes, it was the Great Storm of Galveston, Texas, that wiped out the entire town. It's the reason why there's even a seawall to begin with, is to keep it from ever happening again. So I've got to know, what part of your life were you able to bring into the crafting of the novel? You talk about the research, but you and I are living this every single year, hurricane season. So how were you able to weave in your experience with, Harvey and Ike and all of these things into what this storm was, and then mixing the two?
You bring up a very interesting point. So yes, we've both been through Hurricane Harvey, even Allison, everything that we've been through here as Houstonians, it's weather-centric, weather-related. So weather has played a huge part in my life growing up. And I remember my dad telling me about the 1900 hurricane. And it wasn't until a lot later in life that I think it was Hurricane Andrew that really got me into watching the Weather Channel religiously from June all the way until the end of hurricane season. I would wait for the 50s, the tropical update. That was exciting to me. And so being where you lived through some of that type of weather, I've been through multiple hurricanes, multiple tropical storms, and then a tornado actually hit my house many, many years ago. So I've lived through one of those. So having firsthand experience of what the wind would sound like, and how it feels to be at the mercy of Mother Nature and not know that uncertainty that it brings, that's all kind of part of the character development that you'll see Clara and her sister Lydia and the people in their home go through those kind of emotions that you would go through even today in a category 4, category 3 hurricane whenever it hits the Houston, Galveston area, even today with all of the modern improvements that we have.
Yeah, and they had no technology. It was like newspaper was barely a thing. And when you really think about it, you put on your human history goggles, they had barely gotten the newspapers like 30 minutes ago. There was no TV, no radio, none of that. You couldn't just, hey, Siri, can you give me the latest hurricane updates? This came out of nowhere for these people, and there were no automobiles. You couldn't just hightail it, cross the causeway and get out. So I'd love to get a little bit of insight as to what the story is about, because you talk about Clara, and it reads, in reading the synopsis, is almost like a Titanic but a Galveston version, because you're talking about a girl and her mom and the Gilded Age and this bachelor.
It is. So, there was this mentality back then. So, brief history, Indianola, which no one, or very few people, I can't see no one, but very few people have heard of. Indianola, Texas was the original shipping port of Texas. Indianola was wiped out by a hurricane. Several years later, they decided that Galveston would be better suited. So Galveston was to become the main shipping port of Texas, because the continental shelf, and this is all meteorological, technical jargon, but the continental shelf was thought to be too shallow. They even did a study to see as to whether or not they should create a breakwater to prevent a tragedy like what happened at Indianola from happening in Galveston. But during the Gilded Age, there was this rivalry between Galveston and Houston for the shipping rights to the state of Texas. And Galveston was known as the New York of the South. It was resplendent. It was beautiful. I mean, you go down there now and you take a tour of the Moody Mansion, you walk the Strand, and you can just see how, a lot of that architecture remained, and it was gorgeous and it was stunning. And there was this sort of hubris to the mentality of people there that no storm could ever overtake Galveston. No storm could ever wipe us out. Houston will never surpass Galveston's ability to, be the main export center of Texas. And once the 1900 hurricane hit, it changed everything. It changed everything for Galveston. It changed everything for Houston. They were able to secure a $1 billion grant from the government and, construct the Houston Ship Channel to become what it is today.
Let's talk about the plot line with Clara and her mom and the bachelor as it pertains to the storm, because you begin the story before the storm hits, and then it's all about how they are trying to survive and thrive amidst all this chaos.
So Clara is 17. She is our main character. And it is through the eyes of her, it's all written down in her journal, which her granddaughter finds after her passing. And she writes of her life up through and after the storm. So her mother was very into the Galveston high teas and society, the Tremont House, which was a very posh place to have high teas, debutante galas, and she wanted all of this for herself, but she also wanted it for her daughters. But Clara, as it says in the beginning of the book, Mother always said that I was born with a spark that would, if left unattended, grow into a fire that would one day consume me. So we already start, and we see that Clara has a little bit of a defiant streak. So she doesn't want to become what her mother wants, which is the proper wife and the lady of society that her mother is so aspiring for her daughters and herself to become. And so now her sister is perfectly willing to go along with the plan, and she's betrothed to a very nice young gentleman. But the storm of 1900 changes absolutely everything. And so everything that her mother and Clara reflects, later, how everything that they had worked for, everything that her mother held dear, had been completely reduced to nothing. How socioeconomic standing was of no value any longer. We were simply survivors, those that did survive, and there were a lot who did not.
Historical fiction is so hard to pull off because you're dealing with all these actual events and then people. And I got to know, because you're talking all the weather lingo and the engineering when it comes to Indianola and Galveston. And here you've got a story that you just described that's like the complete opposite. So you're like left brain and right brain. And how were you able to merge the two? Or I guess better framed, what would you say would be the biggest challenge when writing Saltwater and Driftwood? Because as writers, we want to keep from doing the info dump. Nobody likes info dumps. And
storytelling.
Yeah, so how were you able to reconcile all this knowledge with creating this compelling story?
Through dialogue and the social interactions that you'll see in the book between her father, who works at the cotton exchange. And cotton and sugarcane were two of the main exports out of Galveston. And so it's through the dialogue of important people within the higher echelon of Galveston society that you sort of understand this culture, the things that have happened in the past and how they believe that it will never happen again. And all of that had to be carefully woven in through dialogue and experience and memories of bringing things, even further into the past that people are talking about. And we do see some of the stories. So a very famous story from the Great Storm of 1900 is St. Mary's Orphanage. And so we do see from the point of view of Sister Bernadette, as she welcomes in some of the orphans from the train to the orphanage. And then that scene where no one from the orphanage survived. And we know this from historical details. And during I'm not spoiling anything because you can look all of this up. But during the search and rescue, on the beach, they find a clothesline, and they pull on the clothesline and find a child. And then they pull and they find another child, and another child, and another child. And then finally the sister, at the very end, she had tied all of the children to herself in an effort to save them, but was unsuccessful. All 93 children and the sisters at St. Mary's Orphanage perished in that flood. And or in that hurricane, and that is in the story as well. So we do take different stories, different point of views, not only Clara's and her families, the Gladys family, who is completely made up, but they also include some other points of view within the story that are woven in. So as Clara and her sister are wanting to volunteer at the orphanage through their church, St. Mary, which St. Mary's still stands today.
Yeah, I was going to ask you if the orphanage was still around or did it get completely leveled out?
The orphanage is no longer there, but St. Mary's Cathedral is, and I had the chance to visit it. And it is beautiful. It's amazing to think that how many of these buildings did survive. It's
incredible that any of them survived because of, again, going back to the technology of the time. The engineering, pales in comparison to what 2022 engineering is. And there was no seawall. There was none of that. So yeah, it's just, to me, it's a miracle that any of those buildings even survived. And it's just, it's heartbreaking when you hear the stories. I was today years old when I learned about the orphanage and the children and the sisters. That is absolutely heartbreaking. I'd love to know, though, because you talk about the heavy amount of research that you were doing prior to writing. I mean, you can't just say, "Oh, it's a historical novel. I'm just going to make everything up." You got to get you got to get the who's, the what's, and the where's correct, and then it's like everything else you build around that. So, how much did you find yourself editing out to keep from committing the error of info dumps?
It was more restructuring. So I knew what things I really wanted to keep in the piece, and what was integral to the story, to bring it all together, to have that historical accuracy, but without being too info dumpy. It was really about structuring the story in a way that told the entirety of the event and the people surrounding the event, but not do it in kind of a textbook sort of way. So it's not a nonfiction book, but you get a lot of historical accuracy. Well, it is all historically accurate, except for the Gladys family, which is a product of my own imagination, a vehicle. The characters are a vehicle for the event and for the story.
Whenever I talk to authors of historical fiction, I always think of this interview that I had with Brad Thor last year, and he talks about faction. So he's a political thriller writer, but it's tying in current events. So this is really no different, where you've got your readers who are like, oh, wow, I'm going to Google that, because it's like there's so much fact, but it's also a work of fiction. So it's faction. And so it really takes a creative mind to be able to tie in all these actual historical details and all this info and weave it into something that's going to want to keep people turning the page. And what is really cool is that you can go from writing about the Great Storm of 1900 and vampires and lycanthropes, and you're also taking people to a completely different spot. Now, you've got a pen name, and I got to hear all about this, because 2022, this is like a whole new side of Anna, or should I say Vanessa?
So Vanessa Morse, the pen name that I chose to explore the darker side of romance. And The Amphetamine Girls is the first book by Vanessa Morse, but it will not be the last. So it just a trigger warning, content warning here. It is a dark romance. It deals with some very heavy, very dark topics that are not discussed enough. It follows the dark side of privilege. Growing up in an affluent neighborhood myself, you see that there is, people say, a privileged life, and that's meant to sort of insinuate that everything is wonderful and there are rose-colored glasses, and that is simply not the case. There's a very dark side to privilege, and we see that in the Amphetamine Girls, and specifically in the friendship between Natalia and Lisette. And it also brings to light some mental health issues. And that's really so there is a lot of spice. It was a very spicy book, but there is a very deep underlying message about the power of mental health and about preserving your own at all costs.
Before we wrap up the interview, I'd love to do a rapid fire, Anna, beginning with your favorite place to write.
The only place that I can, which is in my bed.
What is harder to write, the first sentence or the last?
The last.
You're stranded on an island. It doesn't have to be Galveston. With 2 books, 1 fiction and 1 nonfiction. What are they?
Oh, God. Okay. Fiction. Marcel Proust's Swan's Way. Nonfiction. Eric Larson's Isaac Storm.
Best place for readers to find out more about Anna J. Walner and all of her work.
AnnaJWalner.com, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok. I am everywhere. Just Anna J. Walner is not a usual name. Type it into Google and it will take you somewhere that I am.
And by the way, that's 2 N's, and then that's Walner with 1 L. So AnnaJWalner.com is the place to go. You find out all about Saltwater and Driftwood. She's got the vampire romance. She's got the dark romance and all kinds of good stuff happening with her literary talents. Anna, thank you so much for talking with me on the pod.
Thank you, Freddie. It's been a pleasure, as always.
Hey, it's me. I'm back with a quick little nudge. If you enjoyed this podcast as much as I did putting it together for you, then please leave a review on your favorite podcast platform and subscribe to the newsletter at cruisethroughhtx.com and share with your family and friends. Thank you.